So this is the end, my only friend. Let's start. Let's finish with the reality with which we started. Manifesto 15. I'd like to hear from everyone of you if you agree with every point of this manifesto, or maybe something important is missing in this manifesto, or maybe there is something too much in this manifesto. I've heard you've got some missing points, that's why I'm curious what it could be. So maybe for a small 3 minutes for each of you to tell us about your reflection with manifesto. Do you think it's a good idea or not? Okay, so Fiona, can we start from you? Here you have. You can sit, yes, of course. You've got 2 microphones, so please share it. Kristen.
Okay, it's very difficult to answer that question because it's quite a lengthy manifesto, and whilst I have read it a few times, I can't hold it all in my mind at the moment. But I just had a quick glance back just to look for the word parents, and I'm not sure that it's in there. Is it in there? Number 12. Number 12. Let's have a look. Number 12. Okay, for me that is a really important point. A lot of the talk I hear about democratic education and democratic schools is about teachers and children, or adults and children, and I just think that sometimes parents get left out of the picture, and I think it's really education is like a triangle, and that relationship between parents and children and teachers is absolutely crucial, and the 3 must work together to get the best outcomes for young people. Okay. That's all I'm going to say for now. Because
so, parents are missing in this manifesto. Wojtek?
I like this manifesto very much. Thank you. But if I really look close, there is something missing from my point of view. I think that at our times, it's really important to create something that we call planetary awareness and the ecological kind of awareness as well. So that's something that is missing in this manifesto, in my opinion, and it should be stressed very strongly, since we witnessed recently growth of nationalistic kind of ideas and separatism of different sorts, which is extremely dangerous for our planet. And one other thing, I think I mentioned it in my lecture here at the beginning, that I think that we should be careful with creating paradise-like environment for our children, because this planet is not a paradise yet. And I would, from my observation point, I would add to the practical, day-by-day educational ideas some more structure and teamwork, structured teamwork. I think that this is missing on a very practical level. Thank you.
Okay, Crystal.
Is it working? Yeah, I was one of the persons who actually translated the manifesto quite quickly after John posted it. And I think this manifesto is not about giving answers or asking all the questions that need to be asked. This manifesto is about giving a direction of people to think differently about education. And I therefore cannot say that there are things missing or that things should be on it that are not on it yet. Because I think everybody must start with these basic questions, basic points on this manifesto, and start questioning themselves. And by questioning, you always come to new questions. So start questioning why. Why are we doing it? Why are we actually doing what we are doing? Just continue questioning yourself with why we're doing things. I would say there is no beginning and there is no end to this question.
Super. Of course, my question was not to criticize Manifesto 15, not at all. I just wanted to ask you what is the most important thing in education for you that way. It's not the best way, but
for me, the most important of this manifesto is that it's a starting point for change, for people to really rethink education. That is most important, and not really that there's one point more important than another. I think it's just the whole starting point for thinking differently. That is most important in my opinion.
Thank you very much, Crystal. So, David?
Yeah, I made a few suggestions for changes, but to be honest, I can't remember what they were. So just quickly looking behind me to see, I would say yes, I agree with pretty well all of it. That is the parts that I can understand. There are a few bits I don't completely understand, and I'd like to talk about those a bit more, but not now. There is an assumption that I mentioned in my talk yesterday, which it's not entirely fair to say the manifesto says this, but I think some people do, and I think it comes near to saying, which is this. We know the current education systems are not producing the kind of innovative, collaborative, communicative, empathetic people who we need to save the planet, to create a sustainable planet. And I sometimes feel that running through the manifesto and the thinking of some people is a belief that because our current education systems are so wrong for the future of the planet, they will necessarily change. Here's where I have a problem. There are some globalizing forces that see a lot of money to be made out of keeping the education systems like they are, and in making them even less appropriate for a sustainable future. And for me, these are the same people who will go to the Arctic to drill for oil, even though they know these carbon energy sources must stay in the ground or we have no future. These are the people who know that the assets of the major oil companies are valueless if we are to have a future. And here is a crisis for capitalism. So I want to know, who are the people who can make decisions that they know will lead to a planet that will not support their grandchildren? Who are these people? Because they are the same people who would make the education system even less appropriate for the future. How can they want more money when in the lives of their grandchildren there will be nothing to spend it on? I cannot understand this, but I believe these people are very powerful, and the idea that education will just, in its own way, change in the direction of sustainability I don't think so. I think we have a big fight on our hands to make sure that the people who will happily destroy this planet are not allowed to do so. So for me, to change the education system is a battle, and there will be some mighty forces against us, and we have to be prepared for this.
Well, to me, the manifesto is never intended to have any answers, never intended to have any solutions. A solution would be, put kids into nature more. An answer to it would be to implement some of the social changes that Jerry was talking about. But the purpose manifesto is to go back to really addressing the basic questions. So openly asking, what are we educating for? Why are we doing it? For whom is it supposed to benefit? Because too much of what we've been working on is working at the wrong answers to those questions. And so we go back to those basics, then we can consider actions such as connected with nature or broader social reform that it could also go with. So I really view these as principles for evolving learning, but not a specific action plan. In fact, it describes nothing. It doesn't say anything that we need to do. In that regard, I have absolutely no ideas, or probably all the wrong ideas, right? But it's to get the conversation going. And that's why I think it's important that we take this microphone out to you and ask, so which actions should we start taking today?
Okay, raz.
Teraz ja będę mówił po polsku, i pani będzie tłumaczyć.
Karolina będzie tłumaczyć.
Okay.
Przede wszystkim manifest jest cudowny.
I think the manifesto is just great.
Taka rzecz, która się odbija w manifestie i w wielu naszych rozmowach,
I think that manifesto is reflects.
To jest stawianie, i moim zdaniem bardzo głęboko słuszne, stawianie na człowieka i jego rozwój.
Is focusing on human beings and on his development.
Ja gorąco wierzę, że człowiek może się rozwijać tylko we wspólnocie.
I deeply believe that a human being can develop only within the community.
Jakbym miał coś dodawać do manifestu,
If I could add anything to the manifesto,
to umiejętność myślenia o pracy w grupie i o tworzeniu organizacji jako oddzielnego bytu, nie jako zbioru osób.
so that would be the ability to create the community as such, not as a group of people working individually.
Jak mowa o zmianie cywilizacyjnej, która się dzieje,
If we talk about the change in our civilization,
to zmieniłbym leciutko z powiedzenia musimy wywołać zmianę na sformułowanie musimy poradzić sobie ze zmianą, która i tak się dzieje.
I would change from we have to change into we have to how to say it in English?
Która się i tak dzieje, która się wydarza.
We have to handle. Thank you. We have to handle with a change that is going on anyway.
Do tego potrzeba jest sieci i współpracy.
So what we need for that is a network and cooperation.
I mam takie wrażenie, że tak jak tutaj byłem i słyszałem,
And I have a feeling, as I heard from people that I talked to here,
trzeba przenieść na dużo wyższy poziom kooperację między tymi wszystkimi szkołami, nurtami, żeby one tworzyły codzienną pracę wymiany, głębokiej wymiany wiedzy i rozumienia.
that we have to move further or higher
moved to a high level the sense of cooperation between the democratic schools.
Wydaje mi się, że większość szkół pracuje dosyć samotnie.
So I think from what I observed here that most of the schools work individually and on their own, not in a network.
I ostatnia rzecz to jest osobowościowe, osobiste przygotowanie osób, które pracują w szkołach.
And the last thing is the personal development or the personal skills that staff members should have.
Wczoraj wieczorem absolwenci tych szkół
Yesterday, the graduates from democratic schools,
jak się otworzyli,
when they open,
opowiadali, jak tam jest trudno na co dzień.
when they open,
Żaden raj.
and when they talked about so many difficulties that they face, and
Ile-
it's not a paradise at all.
Ile jest konfliktów,
There are so many
ile jest
conflicts
trudności.
and so many difficulties.
I najpiękniejsze jest to, że właśnie z tego się uczą,
And the most,
przezwyciężając to na co dzień.
and the most important,
Nie w raju,
the most beautiful is that they learn how to overcome all those conflicts and problems.
jedna z dziewczyn zapytana, a jak sobie poradzą w korporacji, w której mają wyżej zwierzchników.
When the girl was asked how she would deal with cooperation,
Powiedziała coś, co otworzyło mi serce.
so I heard something that opened my heart.
Powiedziała, my jesteśmy nauczeni szacunku.
She said, we were taught how to respect each other.
W miejscu, w którym będę poniżana, nie będę pracować.
So I would never work in a place where people will undermine me.
Ale jak mi szef wytłumaczy i mnie będzie szanować, to ja mam chyba większy nawet szacunek niż absolwenci zwykłych szkół. Bo ja szanuję każdego.
But if my manager explains why he demands this or that, I would probably have more respect for him and for others than any other graduates from the state school system.
Okay. Instead of answering, Jacek start our discussion, but I think in the good point, because I wanted to ask you about challenging for democratic education and about problems with inside of democratic schools. Who want to answer? Who would like to answer it? Who would like to answer Jacek?
I didn't understand quite well.
Crystal, Jacek told us about some conflicts between students and coach in democratic school. So I'd like to ask you about the most important challenges waiting for democratic education and most important problems inside democratic schools. What do you think?
Wyzwania i problemy szkół demokratycznych, takie jest pytanie.
What are the
Opening a new
challenges?
program.
What are the challenges?
But please share the microphones. You can't hear.
She's opening a new topic, so challenges and difficulties in
Challenges and
democratic education.
challenges and difficulties in opening a democratic school. Is that it? In running also, or in the schools? Okay. Challenges are, I think, with the respective of opening a few schools, challenges are to find a start group with really the same ideal, with people that want to open a school according to principles that you all really agree on. That's one of the main challenges of starting a school. Most of the startups, if you see a breakup, it usually is because they didn't really agree on the basic principles. Challenges in running the school are to get your culture built. build, because school is all about the culture. It's about how you deal with each other. And obviously when you start school, all students are new and they don't have the experience of a democratic background, democratic school. And also the staff members won't have that, or most of the time don't have this experience out of themselves. They have not been to a democratic school themselves. So one of the biggest challenges is really establishing a culture, a good culture in your school. When that's running, then it takes over the daily life. And finding in Holland, I think finding good staff members with a teacher's degree, because we need certified teachers in our school. That's another challenge, because there are hardly any people around that can make this switch that were taught in the traditional system, and that can really have an open mind to do things totally differently.
I think that this question is fundamentally flawed, that assumes that all democratic schools are the same, that there is a democratic school. Whereas every school is different, we all operate differently. The theme of this conference is inspire the future. And rather than we focus on the future, rather than these challenges that hold us back in the past.
Yeah, of course, I asked about challenges, so it's the question about the future. So if you would like to answer, please do.
Yeah. My experience is trying to introduce democracy into public school systems, into state schools. And we just had a workshop on this topic. And I had really three thoughts from my own experience. The first, you can introduce democracy into your pedagogy. You can share the decision making in your class with your students. You can take an interest in the student governance of the school. If there's a students' council, you can make sure in your class there are proper democratic discussions, and that the agreed decisions in the class are taken forward to the Students' Council, that it doesn't become an elite separate from everybody else. Also, I would say, if you're a new teacher trying to introduce some democracy, make some friends. Make sure the head teacher understands to some extent, perhaps not completely, what you're trying to do. So you have some cover from the top. And then make friends in the staff room. Find some other teachers who would also like to do this kind of work. So you have a group. Don't allow yourself to go out as an extremist, maniac, lunatic. Make sure you have some friends. In my own experience, I started in one class with a school with 60 teachers. We then moved to 8 classes operating in a democratic way. And I made sure in my first year I had enough friends to work with the other 7 classes. So we really were a team. Our classrooms were open for students from other classes to go to the teacher who they thought would be most useful. So there was always students moving from class to class. Make sure you have some friends. Yeah. I have one more general statement, really, is you have to be prepared to get fired. Because you will, as you build the strength of friendships with other staff, unfortunately, you will probably also create an opposition, which will itself become organised. And it may well be traditional teachers who are very strong in the teachers' union. Make sure you join the union and have your friends also in the union, so this doesn't become a way of getting action. I wish someone had given me that advice. Don't expect a smooth ride. You won't get it. Which is why it is so important to take the head teacher with you, so that he or she knows they're in for some fun. There's going to be some fireworks. But it's the job of the school management, if they want you to do it, to protect you when the fireworks start.
In my experience, the biggest challenge for the democratic school is the parent. The parent in a very practical, individual way, and the symbolic parent as a vehicle of traditional culture. And this symbolic parent is present in every person, in teachers and children and parents of the children. And how to deal with this parent is essential, in my opinion. When I try to help develop the democratic school of Buderby, I've met with parents once or twice, and we had some kind of a meeting, and several times on other occasions there was a strong opposition from the parent side, and it's not easy to deal with, because in order to really persuade the parents to support the idea of democratic school and to support their children being educated in this kind of school, it takes actually sometimes quite deep psychological work, and it should be clearly stated. And the best way to go is to run the group of parents, so to say. Parents supportive kind of group, that they can exchange their questions, their doubts, their fears, and there's a leader or a mentor that helps them to go around those obstacles. So parents, don't miss the parent. Parent is really extremely important, and the parent part of our own personality as well. Thank you.
Could I make a quick comment on this?
Yes, of course. Yes, of course.
In my talk yesterday, I talked a lot about parents, and I completely agree with what has just been said. In my first school, I was very fortunate, because the students had just failed the examination that said you cannot go to the gymnasium, you are too stupid, you cannot go to university, you have to go to the Hauptschule, which in England we call the secondary modern. Parents want their children to be happy, but they also want their children to be successful. I was lucky. The parents saw their children recovering the confidence that had been destroyed by the examination. So I was in a lucky position. I had the full support of parents right from the start. It must be more difficult in the gymnasium, where the parents feel their children are on the successful road to a great professional career in the future. Why are they wasting time with democracy? And here I think you have to prepare the ground very carefully. But if you can quickly show that the learning is more successful because the children are happier and more secure in the democratic environment, My experience is this is a very powerful argument on citizenship education. I persuaded the government to give me some money to wander around the world looking at democratic schools. My excuse was looking at different forms of assessment and did democratic schools help young people develop democratic values? Well, there's no doubt about that. But one of the things I found that was most impressive, and from my own experience, I asked children in democratic schools, what is it about this school that makes you so enthusiastic to learn? The answer, I feel safe here. Many of the students had come from schools where they had wanted to learn. They had been called nerds, creeps, teachers' pets, because they wanted to study and to learn. And there was nothing to protect them from the bullying in the regular school. In the democratic school, with the openness, the transparency, and in American, the JC, the Judicial Committee. It was said to me over and over again, also by children at Summerhill, I feel safe here. And this is an important message for parents, because I think parents want their children to be safe. They want their children to be secure, because we all know this is the environment that leads to effective learning. If children are afraid, if children are unhappy, they will not learn. And I think this is an important message to parents. Thank you.
Okay, just to follow on that point about parents very quickly. So the message is that we need to take parents with us, not to move forward in spite of parents, but make sure that we keep parents on board so that they know what we're trying to do and can work with us, so that children are supported at home and school in the same way, and that there is a conflict between what's happening at the home and what's happening at the school. But the quick point that I wanted to make, when you asked what are the challenges, are there any challenges in democratic education? And I would say one of the biggest challenges is to make sure that everybody has a voice, that everybody is heard, that it's not just those people who are very confident and have loud voices that always get their views listened to, but that schools and student councils or whatever really take the opportunity to seek out the views of children who may not be so good at getting their voice heard, or teachers who might not be so good at getting their voice heard. So it's really important that a democratic environment is an inclusive environment and all voices are heard.
Thank you, please.
Okay, so I agree, I want to put everything together. Because each thing you've said, you're all saying the same thing. But this, I didn't get a chance to answer the first question either, which is fine.
Yeah, take your chance.
Do it together. The only thing I'd say that maybe is missing from the manifesto is more emphasis about community. It's mentioned there, but it needs its own line, and it needs to emphasize what community means. Because what I'm hearing, so what I would say is that it's critically important for a democratic school, especially when it's getting started, young, hasn't had a chance to establish its culture yet. You've got teachers that have no idea because they've only themselves gone to traditional schools. They've probably been factory trained to teach in traditional schools. So things are probably going to be rocky at first, one way or another. So maintaining a very strong sense of community, and actual community is critical. And then that means you've got the parents involved. There is inevitably going to be conflict. How can there not be conflict? Especially in the beginning when there's so much pressure. And so you've got to trust each other enough. Your communication has to be open enough between staff, parents, students. That communication has to be open and clear all the time, or else trouble builds up. And then you have people getting angry and saying, screw you, I'm out. And things start blowing apart. So community is the key, I think.
Super, thank you. So I would like to ask another question. Is it possible for children and for everybody to be both happy and successful? What do you think?
I don't think you could be one without the other. Personally. I know successful people who are unhappy. I don't think they don't feel successful. Really. They feel like there's something missing. They're not satisfied with their situation.
To jest bardzo ciekawe pytanie. Ostatnio czytałem książkę Fitzgerald o mózgu.
Recently I've read a book about our brain.
Cytuje ona jednego z neurobiologów.
There is a quote from one of the
który mówi, że szczęście to jest do wytrenowania umiejętność.
That happiness is a skill to be trained.
Że pewne praktyki, na przykład wschodnie, ale też modlitewne, ale też zwykłe treningowe, że coś takiego jak być szczęśliwym,
there are some practices like the Far Eastern practices
w głęboki sposób, nie mieć przyjemności.
Which train happiness in a very deeply kind of sense.
Że to można wypraktykować.
So the happiness can be practiced.
Jestem przekonany, że szkoły demokratyczne mają jakiś zrąb takiej praktyki właśnie.
And I believe that democratic schools have a bit of those practices already.
Tak jak to Pan powiedział, każda ma trochę inną.
So as you said, that each school is different and has its own practice.
Ale musi ją nazywać, wypracować, iść z tym do przodu.
But each school has to work further on this practice and go further and develop this practice, this particular one, just about the school.
A sukces jest efektem, a nie celem.
And the success is just the effect, not the goal.
Jak jestem zorientowany na sukces, to mogę zniszczyć, żeby go osiągnąć.
So if I am at the goal,
mogę zniszczyć, żeby go
so I
osiągnąć.
can destroy it.
A jak jestem zorientowany na szczęście moje i Twoje, społeczne,
But if my goal is happiness
dobro wspólne,
and the common good,
to sukces sam przyjdzie.
so the success will come.
Are you still alive? So, yes or not? Who is alive? Please give us a voice. Give us a voice.
Just a quick answer. It's kind of a binary question. So if I don't say yes, the answer is no. But yes, of course, I think it's possible. We see it with many democratic students, democratic exchange students. We also have to recognize that we do see happy and successful students also within traditional education. It's there. It's abusive, not so much, but it's still there. So we're not the solution, we are a solution. And we can better enable students to actualize themselves and maybe through their kind of pathway to happiness and success.
Yeah. Just to completely agree with both the previous speakers, I don't think democratic schools are the answer to depressive illness, for example, or for the loss of loved ones. For example, life is sometimes filled with unhappiness. What I would say, from my observation of children who've learned about themselves, to be tolerant of each other, to be supportive of each other, to develop an authenticity in their own feelings, to not pretend they're somebody else, and who can share their feelings with others. These children are more likely to survive unhappiness and grow through unhappiness than children who have developed an unauthentic personality in an authoritarian environment.
Yeah, and then I just want to add, happiness is relative. It's defined by the person. You can't define happiness for everybody. So in the Sudbury Valley School, they have a book called The Pursuit of Happiness, and this is also, I think, in their Pursuit of Happiness. And it's also, I think, in the Constitution, is it, or whatever? Yeah, that people have the right for liberty, blah blah, and pursuit of happiness. I think this is something that people always strive for. You don't strive for unhappiness. Are you going to lead a miserable life your whole life? So I think people always look for possibilities. The thing is that students from democratic schools are more have learned actually that if they are in an environment that they are not happy with, that they have a choice. They know that they have a choice. They can always quit and do something else. And it's not, it's yourself that is creating your own happiness or unhappiness. And I think this is really something that democratic education is adding to the students.
Many years ago, one of my mentors told me, remember, never pursue happiness. If you pursue happiness, you will never catch it. So, happiness is a byproduct of the hard, meaningful work. I think I like this definition very much.
And I would just add, that we need to define success very broadly. Success is not just about academic qualifications, and for each child, success will mean something very different.
Yes, but we are not good without your answers. Please. Okay.
I answered first. You have to have both.
Okay. Okay, super. So another part of questions maybe. How can we teach responsibility in the environment of freedom?
How do you teach responsibility in the environment of freedom?
The answer to that is easy. You cannot teach it in any other environment. The whole notion of freedom and responsibility are so closely connected. If you have no freedom, you cannot be responsible. You can only be obedient. And obedience is not the same as responsibility. So, to become responsible, you have to be given responsibility. It's quite simple. And there's much more of this in a democratic school than in an authoritarian school.
I think I also talked about this yesterday. First we have to define what is responsibility, because in the traditional system, responsibility is often that you are responsible for the work to be done in that week, or for your homework, or for someone else's goals. And that's not responsibility that we are talking about. We're talking about personal responsibility for the choices, your actions, and accepting the consequences of your choices and your actions. That is personal responsibility. In democratic schools, that is entirely what you learn in a freedom, and the freedom must be defined, as I also talked about yesterday. There is the conditional freedom, but there is also the true freedom. And in true freedom, you are capable of making action choices. You're capable of making autonomous choices, which means that you also can quit. You can say, I don't want to do this. You're allowed to make your own choices. Whereas in conditional freedom, you're not allowed to make your own choices full till the end. So you can have a choice whether to go left or right, but the end goal is already set out for you. And in this environment, you're not feeling responsible for the end result or the goal that is set by somebody else. So in principle, by working with action choices within a democratic school, you are learning that action choices actually means that you are fully responsible also for the results and the consequences.
Again, a long time ago, one of my mentors said to me, responsibility is not what you think it is. It is ability to respond. And this is ability to respond to the important needs of your own and the important needs of people and situations around you. So, if you are able to respond adequately, you're a responsible person. And it goes together with a slogan. I think it was put together by ecologists. Think globally, act locally, response personally.
To, co mnie porusza i podziwiam w szkołach demokratycznych, to jest to, że z całego mojego doświadczenia wynika, że budzą proces, który jest autentyczny i naturalny dla człowieka.
Is that democratic schools awakens something that is so natural to human beings.
Człowiek, jeżeli tylko nie zaburzy tego, to lubi się uczyć.
So human being loves learning.
Człowiek lubi być wolny.
It loves being free.
W naturalny sposób z tej wolności wynika to, że bierze odpowiedzialność za siebie i za innych.
And it is very natural way, comes out that he takes responsibility for others.
Oczywiście musi to trenować, musi praktykować, nie tylko być.
And of course the skill must be practiced.
Musi to rozgryzać w konkretnych sytuacjach.
It must be cut into chunks and digested.
Wydaje mi się, że szkoły demokratyczne w gruncie rzeczy są szkołami terapeutycznymi.
And I believe that democratic schools are not just schools, democratic schools, but they are schools of therapy.
One pozwalają i uczniom, i nauczycielom, i rodzicom
they allow students and parents and staff members
odkrywać to, co w nich naturalne,
to discover the processes which are natural to them.
A problemy związane są z tym, że nam tak trudno jest wrócić do zwykłej rozmowy i na przykład uważnego słuchania albo uczenia się.
And then the problems that appear are connected with this inability to just be in touch with other person.
A to, że to jest potwornie trudne, wczoraj rozmawiałem tu z jedną z pań, które pracują w szkole demokratycznej.
And yesterday I talked to a person who works for democratic schools, and
I powiedziała, że ona po 2 dniach, bo pracuje się tu 3 dni, po 2 dniach musi już wyjechać, odpocząć.
That after 2 days of her work, she has to leave the school. She must leave students for a while.
Dlaczego? Przecież sobie siedzi, a uczniowie robią co chcą.
Why?
Luzik.
It doesn't really work. I mean, she sits on her chair and students do what they want to do.
2 dni koncentracji, uwagi.
These are 2 days of hard work, of concentration and paying attention.
Podążania za.
Following students.
Bycia zaskakiwanym różnymi sytuacjami.
Being surprised by the others, by students.
Czapki z głów.
Szapowa.
Can I just ask, could you put your hands up if you're either from America or from South Sudan?
Poprosić, żeby podnieśli ręce osoby, które są z Ameryki albo z południowego Sudanu.
Okay, what this is about is that if you would come from any other country in the world, children have the right to have a say. Governments have signed up, governments in every other country have signed up to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. You not signed up. And Article 12 of the UNCC, or whatever it's called, is that all children should have a say on issues which affect them. Well, education affects them, so they should have a say. So that charter or that convention, which was signed, I think, back in the 1980s, contains 40 or 50 rights for children and young people, which governments have signed up to provide it. And my feeling is that if we want children to learn about taking responsibility, we need to ensure that their rights are upheld.
I got one. Oh, it's okay. Can I just tell you a little story about a democratic class in a public school? These kids had been in this democratic class for over a year. A new girl came to the class. She was very unhappy at home. She began to bully some kids, not in her own class, but in another class. She began to be rude to some teachers, not me, but in another class. She began to steal money from other children. The children in the class knew that she might be thrown out of the school. One evening, I noticed that 18 of the kids in the class had stayed behind after school. These were all the children who didn't have to travel home on the school bus. I said, oh, what's going on? Just out of interest. And they said, we're going to have a meeting to talk about Pauline. You can come if you want to. It was my class. So we had the meeting, and the kids talked and talked and talked. What can we do to help Pauline? Somebody suggested, maybe we should punish her one day and be nice to her another day and see which works. But that was not a popular point of view. And then finally, a group of about 3 kids, they were 12 years old, recommended that we should give Pauline every important job in the class. She should be made chair of the class meeting. She should be made one of the class magistrates. She should be made editor of one of the most important columns in the class newspaper, which was the sports column. The next day, Pauline came into the class, and she was told in the class meeting, oh, Pauline, sorry you didn't get to the meeting last night, we forgot to tell you, but you are now chair of the class meeting. You are also editor of the sports column in the newspaper, and next time there is a meeting of the class court, you are one of the magistrates. Is that okay? Pauline burst into tears and cried for some minutes. The whole class was respectful and silent while she cried. And then, through her tears, she just said, thank you. She never stole again. She was not thrown out of the school. And she was never rude to another teacher. For me, this is a small example of young people in a regular public school showing an incredible level of responsibility because they had the opportunity and the freedom to be responsible.
By the way, do you know any bullying problems in the robotics school?
Problemy z prześladowanymi w szkołach demokratycznych, ze zjawiskiem bullyingu.
Not for long.
Niedługo trwają jeszcze są.
And the reason is, that when we get new children sometimes,
Czasami pojawiają
and
się
they're
nowe
angry,
dzieci, pełne złości,
they've been bullied,
też były prześladowane w innych
either at
szkołach,
home or in their
w
previous
domu,
schools,
w poprzednich szkołach,
albo
w obu miejscach. Zdarza się, że mają tutaj szansę, nikt tutaj nikt nie pilnuje, mają dużo wolności i czasu, żeby zacząć prześladować. Ale szybko wydarza się tak, że ktokolwiek jest prześladowany, po prostu wzywa spotkanie, prosi o spotkanie. U nas szkoły wszystko jest tylko jest potrzeba spotkania, to wszystko zatrzymuje, on pachuje cencznie ciągle, zaciągany.
Actually, this kind of meeting at our school we call a council meeting. It is a democratically run meeting. It has a more therapeutic conflict solving purpose. And so everyone has to come. And of course the bully has to come. And bullying is something that really only happens well in the shadow. You know, you shine a bright when the bully has to face the entire community. You know, well, you know, and then you have 4 other children say, yeah, and yesterday he did this to me, and yeah, me, and you kind of say, how many people has Johnny bullied this week? All the hands go up. But then also, see, we don't then handle it punitively. So that would be easy to just punish Billy or fine him or something. But that's not what we do. You know, and this is the children and the adults. You know, someone will say to Billy, "What's going on? I mean, what are you so angry about? Why? Why? You know, we must have a reason." You know, and then you never know where it's going to go. But yeah, but I give you an example. One year we had a big boy. It was a problem because he was very big, and he was a terrible bully, and he was stubborn about it. But it finally, in one of the meetings, someone finally thought to ask, "Who's bullying you?" And my brother, my big brother. Yeah, and his big brother was vicious. It was really bad at home. It was an unhappy family. You know, bullying happens in unhappy families. And so another one of the students had the idea, if this happens again, we're going to make the big brother come to the meeting. And that boy, he was a high school boy. He didn't go to the school. But the meeting voted this policy in. And so we told the mother, okay, if your son bullies in our school again, at school, your older son is tell him he's going to have to come to a meeting. And it happened. And the older brother had to come in. He had to stay home from school the next morning. He had to come into a meeting. And he had to face the whole community. And all the kids that are being bullied are saying, you've got to stop, because when you bully Fano, he comes to school and he's picking on us, so you've got to stop. We're tired of this. And the older brother was like, okay. And it was over.
I think this is a good example. Really nice. What I want to add is that, in principle, any democratic school has a certain judicial system in its school. It depends on how they have organized it, and in the Albany Free School they do it differently from how we do it. In our school we do it according to the Sudbury Valley School, but there are other methods. What you see in general is that children really know when they are bullied, they have a place to go to where they know that they will be heard, they will be treated fair, and that also the other person who is bullying will be treated fair. And I think that is the most important thing of having a safe environment, that students, as soon as they come to our schools, they know they have their own possibilities to solve their own problems, and they have to do that themselves. They have to step up and go and ask for help. I know that in Summerhill they have this system with the ombudsman persons, or they go to a tribunal. But every school, although they do it differently, they have their ways of finding solutions within the community. It's not one person that is going to say you shouldn't do this, or this is not right. It is within the community that the solutions are solved, or that the problems are solved. Sorry.
And just to link that back to the last question, which was about responsibility, this is a perfect example of how democratic communities or democratic schools encourage children to take active responsibility for their own behaviour.
Thank you very much. So I think it's the highest time for your questions. Do you have any, I hope? Any questions? Any statements? Any... Marianna? You haven't had enough.
Dziękuję. Ja powiem po polsku, dobrze? Chciałam Was zapytać o to, jak się rozwija ruch szkół demokratycznych w Waszych krajach. Dlatego, że to, co my obserwujemy w tej chwili w Polsce, to ruch przede wszystkim wychodzący ze strony rodziców. Obserwujemy go jako po prostu ruch parentingowy. Te szkoły, które w tej chwili wyrastają jedna po drugiej w całej Polsce, są zakładane przede wszystkim przez rodziców.
You have to give me some time to translate. Okay, so my question is about how is it progressing in your countries? So that was the very first question, and that was a comment. And if you can repeat
In Poland, there are parents who create democratic schools. It's movement of parenting. So this is why I'm asking you how it works in your countries.
How does it work?
Pytanie dotyczy tego, ponieważ w Polsce inicjatywa wychodzi od rodziców, to rodzice zakładają szkoły demokratyczne i moje pytanie do Was jest, jak to się działo, czy dzieje w Waszych krajach?
And how do you find the money for it? That was the question from Katarzyna from the audience also. So let's match two questions.
Wait a minute.
How do you create democratic school and how do you manage to...
No, it's different.
No, okay.
So it's how it's progressing in our countries. So, I think we saw in 2002 an enormous growth of private schools based on democratic principles in the Netherlands, and they were mostly established by parents. In that time, this was quite successful, and the government started to become quite fearful because there was quite a So then the government started to become fearful, and they said, "Oh, we have to do something about it." So in that time, they started to become more difficult for schools, and they started to inspect schools and didn't approve certain schools, so the number dropped dramatically. And after 2007, after some negotiations with the government, there is more clearance about, at this moment, about what the school really, what the requirements are for schools now. And now this is more clear. You see another enlightenment. You see more schools growing within the communities. So sometimes teachers and parents together creating schools. Yeah. So there are 10 or 12 schools now at the moment, and two startups.
Anywhere at the beginning, 2002?
I don't know, I think it went from 1 or 2 schools to... from 1 or 2 schools to, I think, around 10, 15 schools and startup groups. It was really exploding, and then it dropped. And now it's back to that level again, more or less.
Okay, in the US, so in the 1970s, there were thousands of all kinds of different preschools, whatever. But then, you get into the 90s, maybe 100 or less. Those schools were not able to sustain themselves. But now, last 10 years or so, it's taking off again. We're making, many new schools are starting every year. Some by parents, some by unhappy teachers, all kinds of people starting them. So it's great. It's really exciting. It's for the money? You want to know about the money? Later.
No, teraz.
So, money's a problem. That's a big challenge for small schools. And then, but it's, schools are able to figure it out. There are many ways to solve that problem. Where it's a critical problem, unfortunately, is because in the US it's still almost impossible to start a publicly funded democratic school. The government just wants, local governments, they're too threatened by the idea, it's too radical. And so then the private democratic schools, they have to charge a lot of tuition in order to have enough money to survive. And then the school becomes exclusive. So the challenge of creating a democratic school that's open to everyone, that's an enormous problem that we're still working on. There may be 2 or 3 of those schools in the entire United States right now.
Okay. It's fairly simple to describe the situation in England, perhaps I should say, rather than the United Kingdom. We have 2 long-established private democratic schools. One, called Sam's School, has no trouble with the inspectors because the students have agreed, democratically, that they will go to lessons. The inspectors are okay. Summerhill, as you know, had its problems. I talked a little bit about this in my talk yesterday. But for the time being, it's okay, though the government would like to undo some of the commitments that have been made to Summerhill School, such as that the school can appoint one of the inspectors to the inspection team when it comes to the school. But so far, the government has not been able to change this because the decision was made by the court, by a judge. In the 60s and 70s, we had a number of other small, private, but not expensive, democratic experiments in Liverpool and in London, and one in Manchester. It was part of the 60s freedoms. They didn't survive for very long. At the same time, some public schools began to experiment, and they went far out in front of most of the other schools. For a while, they got a lot of publicity, but gradually, one by one, the head teachers were picked off and fired, and the experiments closed down. The last one actually was quite recent, and Fiona knows more about it than me, but once again, the head teacher was forced to leave the school. Recently, we have got a growing interest in making some public schools more democratic. And these are schools that are not going so far ahead of most, just a little ahead. They are giving the students much more responsibility than in normal schools. And I described in my talk research into 20 of these schools, where we found that the examination results, the attendance figures, the exclusion figures were better in these schools when compared with schools in similar social circumstances, when you compared like with like. And that was some good news. And I think it's fair to say we have a growing number of public schools trying to be a little more democratic, seeing how far they can push the limits of the law. And some of them are really very interesting. But as I said yesterday, there may be 30 or 40 out of 4,000 secondary schools. There are also 1 or 2 very interesting primary schools, maybe half a dozen, that are seriously democratic. But we have 21,000 primary schools, so the numbers really are quite small. Again, as I said yesterday, one important development is the school students' organisations themselves. And we've struggled in England for an effective school students' organisation to come into being. But a group of kids are having a conference in October, and 500 other young people have agreed to come, and they hope to launch a new school students' organisation that will have introducing democracy in school as an important part of its agenda. One last point. The government created the opportunity a few years ago for parents to start some schools. 2 groups of parents tried to start Sudbury model schools. One in a town called Frome and another one in Brighton. Unfortunately, the officials in the Department for Education saw through the proposals, realised that there was something rather more radical than the parents were putting on paper, and both the schools were refused funding. So the picture is mixed in England, but we are certainly not at the forefront of democratic schools, sadly.
Just say very quickly that the situation in Scotland is different. I'll just be very quick here. I mean, there are a few alternative schools in Scotland. There are a few alternative schools in Scotland, but they don't get any funding from the state. However, people are free to set up a school, a democratic school as well, if they want to. But what I should say, because people often think that Scotland, Ireland, Wales and England are the same, is that the education system in Scotland is completely different from the education system in England. And the Scottish government is being very forward-thinking about how education in state schools moves forward. And there is a real encouragement for citizenship and for students and parents to be more involved in school decision making, and that's being actively encouraged and supported by the government. And just, I mentioned the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. We have a movement that's organised by UNICEF in England and Wales and Scotland, and it's called the Rights Respecting Schools Agenda. And 42% of schools in Scotland have signed up to be rights-respecting schools, schools that will respect children's rights, of which, as I said earlier, children having a say is part of that. So while I feel very desperate about the situation in England on the whole, I feel very encouraged by what's happening in Scotland.
I think the issue of making democratic school movement more popular and more accessible to other people, to people that are not in the middle class, so to say, it is really a big issue, and we should be very concerned about it. And when I think about something that we could do right now, I think it could be important that we would not define ourselves in opposition to the traditional educational system, because that's what we tend to do. We say we are different, we are better, they're worse, they don't know, we know. We are democratic, they are not democratic. And that's a very confronting kind of language. I would even suggest that we would call our movement New School movement, not democratic. So in order not to create a defensive response from the traditional educational environment. So that's very important, I think. And we should think about our school as a new idea, not different idea, or the idea which is opposed to something that is terrible and useless and so on. So I think it's a very important inner attitude also, and the language that goes with it. That we should not confront other people, but we should do our own thing. New school. And I think this is extremely important. How we can persuade politicians responsible for education in our countries to do something with the traditional system, I have no idea. It's a very difficult task. I think politicians, as you said, they are not interested in creating people that are free, responsible, and autonomous. So it can be difficult, but let's keep doing it.
Thank you. John, you don't want to tell us about the Czech Republic schools?
I would love to tell you about the Czech Republic, but I'm not from the Czech Republic. That said, it turns out I have a PhD in comparative education, so I could talk for hours on it, but I think that it's very clear when we talk about democratic schools or new schools, I think that we see there is a severe east-west divide in approaches towards people's perceptions about it. Oftentimes, just as we're talking about openness or opening education is viewed, further east you go, particularly in Russia, is viewed as an attempt by the West to torpedo their educational system. And that doesn't make it quite torpedo their educational system. And so it's something that we need to keep in mind, that a system that has developed and works maybe particularly well in Sudbury Valley, or in England, or in Holland may not work particularly well here, and that we may need to develop a unique solution with unique language and unique visions. And this requires an unusual amount of leadership, rather than followership and trying what's been done before. And we talk about democratic education. This is really democracy at its core. We come together as a community to build something that's bigger than any of us.
To, co mnie troszkę tak jak powiedziałeś o nowej edukacji, to z czym mam kłopot, na przykład tutaj ze spotkaniem, to, że nie ma tutaj tylu wspaniałych, nowych prądów, które są w Polsce.
When you mentioned new education, I regret that there aren't as many alternative trends and movements here as there are in Poland.
Zarówno robionych wewnątrz szkół publicznych,
The trends that appear within public schools,
jak na przykład Centrum Edukacji Obywatelskiej, które działa w połowie szkół w Polsce,
for example,
Jacka Strzemycznego.
for example, the Central Education Obywatelskiej, which operates within 50% of public schools in Poland.
Nie widoczny. No, może właśnie polega to na tym, że musimy szukać jakiegoś sposobu rozpoznania się, mając swoją metodę. Tak, to jest jednak demokratyczne szkoły, tu są Montessori, tu są eksperymenty takie, ale razem stanowimy pewną próbę szukania nowej szkoły.
Perhaps within certain types of schools, such as democracy or any other alternative schools, we should look for a common sort of trend for all those schools.
Ja słyszę o niezwykłej ilości też drobnych inicjatyw, tak zwanych programów autorskich wewnątrz szkół.
I also hear about many startups and new ideas and new options that can be started in Poland.
Nabrało to by siły, gdyby w jakikolwiek sposób ci ludzie się zobaczyli i zachowując swoją odrębność współpracowali.
In my opinion, all of those little startup schools operations will develop and will progress if they could come together and talk to each other.
Zachowując swoją odrębność.
Having their own identity at the same time.
No bo przyszłość jest w sieciach.
I think that the future is in network.
So maybe another question. One for the end. Okay. A finished question.
So, just a simple question. I would like you to each come up with one sentence that you would like to say to a public school teacher who is an open-minded one.
Nauczycielowi publicznej szkoły, który jest otwarty.
To me.
Ma otwarty umysł, jest nauczycielem szkoły publicznej. Jedno zdanie, które chcielibyście mu powiedzieć.
Yes, of course. Okay.
Bo moje pytanie jest na propos połączenia różnych i myślę, że warto byłoby uwzględniać też tych rodziców, którzy w ogóle nie korzystają ze szkół, ponieważ moje dzieci w ogóle skończyły podstawówkę bez szkoły i jak ja to ja dużo przepracowałam sama, więc doświadczenia homeschoolersów są cenne i moje pytanie jest właśnie, jak to wygląda w waszych krajach, jeśli chodzi o współpracę szkół demokratycznych i homeschoolersów.
So the question is how in your countries, after that question, how in your countries cooperation between homeschoolers and democratic schools looks like?
I prefer you to answer firstly for this question and in the end for this. This will be one tip for the teacher from public education, and this is the question, what is the parenting movement in your countries?
Homeschooling movement and democratic schools movement, do they cooperate with each other? How does it look like?
Okay. In the U.S.,
Stanach Zjednoczonych?
yeah, there's definitely cooperation.
Zdecydowanie współpracują ze sobą.
Sometimes we are political allies.
Czasami jesteśmy politycznymi sprzymierzeńcami.
If the government tries to crack down
Próbuje bardzo nas tam docisnąć.
and put in more regulations,
Nie chce regulacji narzucić.
actually,
Się łączymy.
sometimes we appreciate, us school people appreciate that the homeschoolers have a lot of power. So often, sometimes they're very mainstream people, lawyers, doctors, business people. They give money to politicians, for their elections. So when they call their government officials, the officials really listen to them. And sometimes we go to each other's conferences. So yeah, good cooperate. There could be more, I think, but there is a good amount.
I would just say that in the UK, and this is probably UK-wide, anybody that's involved with an alternative, whether it's an alternative school or a home educating family, they're mutually supportive. But I don't think there are any formal ways in which they work together. They might have different thoughts on that.
Yeah, in Holland, the homeschooling movement is really small because it's not allowed in the Netherlands, same as in Germany. But there are families that have an exception, and you have to go to court in order to get such an exception. And those families, they have their own organization, and on a personal level, we know the persons who are chairing this organization. We have contact. We are sharing our thoughts. We really appreciate each other in what we are doing. But they have their own fight in the Netherlands because it is just not allowed, and they fight for acceptance. And we fight for our own acceptance, and we don't want to blur these two things because they're not the same. They're not the same battle. And with that respect, obviously we support each other as much as we can, but but not in an organizational level.
Home education is legal in England, and there are at least 50,000 families, probably more, who are home educated. There is no immediate connection between our two democratic private schools and home education, but some students at Summerhill have been home educated in the past, and some students at Sand School have also been home educated in the past, so there's no dispute between them. The government in 2010 tried to close down home education. The most effective defense of home education was made by the kids themselves, who formed themselves into the Home Educated Youth Council, and as I explained in my talk, stood up to government, the Labour government that was trying to close down home education. They spoke so well when they went to the Parliament that they convinced the politicians, especially the Labour politicians, that there was no point in trying to close down home education because the kids had made such a good impression that probably Parliament would have voted against them. The organisation of the home educated students still exists, and I look forward to the day when the school students in England are as well organised as the home educated students.
I think it's important to emphasize that home schools are not democratic schools and vice versa. I think that we could maybe think we're comparing them apples to apples or apples to oranges. That's not true. It's apples to monster trucks. But what I think that there's the commonality and mutual support is that both movements are working to expand the ecology of options that we do have in education, whether it's a home school, it's a democratic school, or a school in another format.
I think my suggestion would be keep the dialogue going about what is education for. Keep talking about it with parents, with teachers, and with children.
I would say if you are in trouble with your students, with transmitting your knowledge to your students and controlling their behavior and so on. We have procedures, we have ideas, we have tools that can be helpful. Get inspired.
Well, I would suggest just start listening to the kids in the class a little bit more careful and treat them as really, or respect them as a human being. And then think twice what you answer.
Yeah. My advice is, don't give up before you've begun. It can look like a very frightening task, but don't be afraid. There is always something you can do. With your own pedagogy, with the way you support the students involved in the governance of the school. There is always something you can do to move in a more democratic direction. But be careful. Be like the fox. Be as cunning as the fox. Be as cautious as the fox. Realize who may be against.
Break the rules, but understand why really first. Now once we have this figured out, organize, organize, organize.
Zacznij od siebie. Ćwicz uważność i empatię.
Practice empathy and mindfulness.
Start with yourself.
Start with yourself.
Okay, another question.
Album.
And this is, of course, not from only from us. It's also from EUDEC Council. So we thank you with us as Blair and the whole team of organization and council of
That's all. Everyone to be with us. Thank you very much. For the tickets and talking about that. Brilliant. Thank you very much.